There we go. Oh, here's another lady coming in.
Yeah, she just said that she got it, so.
Okay.
Yay.
All right. Welcome everyone to our conversation about our new books. I'm Tina Cho, and I'll introduce to you Annette. Annette Whipple is the author of 8 informational books. Hello.
Hi.
Annette, hi. I'm just introducing our author. So if you want to mute yourself, I'm recording.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Annette Whipple is the author of 8 informational books, including the Laura Ingalls Wilder Companion, a chapter-by-chapter guide from Chicago Review Press. She is also the author of Who Knew? The Truth About Owls by Raycraft Books, and The Story of the Wright Brothers from Rockridge Press. She's been very busy. So welcome, Annette.
Thank you, Tina. And that's Tina Cho. And she's the author of 4 picture books: Rice from Heaven, The Secret Mission to Feed North Koreans from Little Bee Books, Korean Celebrations from Tuttle, My Breakfast with Jesus, Worshiping God Around the World. And that's with the publisher Harvest House, new this year, and The Ocean Calls, which we're talking about today, a Haenyeo mermaid story from Penguin Random House. And what's the imprint there, Tina?
Kokala.
Yes, and we're talking about that today. And her lyrical middle grade graphic novel, The Tune Without Words, debuts from Harper Alley in 2023. So we're really glad that you're all here. And we're just going to have this little conversation. We're going to, Tina and I are going to go back and forth a little bit, asking each other questions about our new books. And then we're going to open it up to you all, and you can ask some questions as well. So Tina, I think I'm going to get started. Oh, did you want to tell us anything more about yourself?
Oh, we just...
No, that was all about your books.
Yeah, we just moved around the world. We left Korea after we've been living there for the past 10 years and moved to my home state of Iowa. So we just moved into an apartment here 3 weeks ago, or 2 weeks ago. So still settling in, and I will start teaching kindergarten real soon.
And I live in Pennsylvania with my family. I was a teacher, but now I just use my words to teach, and I love to share about things I'm passionate about, like reading and books and writing. So I get to do a little bit of teaching with children as well as adults, and I teach with my church when we're working together. But yeah, that's just a little bit about me. But Tina, I think I'm gonna get started and ask you, tell us, why don't you show us your new book and tell us all about it.
This is The Ocean Calls, a Haenyeo mermaid story written by me, illustrated by Jess X. Snow, and it takes place in South Korea. At the southern tip of Korea is an island called Jeju, and there are these women. Most of them are elderly, and they're 50 to 80 years of age, and they dive into the ocean without using any breathing equipment, and they will catch sea creatures and then sell them and cook them, and they've been doing this for hundreds of years. It's a tradition. And so I made this a fictional story about a girl named Dayeon, and she wants to be a Haenyeo like her grandmother. And then in the back is Backmatter, the nonfiction part.
So how did you get the idea for this? You were living in South Korea at the time. That had to greatly influence you, but how did you get the idea for The Ocean Calls?
I read about the Haenyeo on Twitter as a tweet. So Twitter has all kinds of great ideas. I find lots of good things on Twitter. So I Googled them and looked them up, and I was fascinated because they were in Korea. So I asked my husband about them, and he said they weren't too far. So yeah, that's how it started. How about you?
So this is the Laura Ingalls Wilder Companion, a chapter-by-chapter guide. And unlike Tina's book, hers is a picture book. My book is a companion guide for the Little House books by Laura Ingalls Wilder, which is a 9-book series that takes place in the 1800s, and it's all about the Ingalls family, and one book about the Wilder family and how they lived life and how they were pioneers. And so my book has this is each of the little house books has a chapter devoted to it in this book, and this is showing some activities, and it also has lots of history with helping children, because the little house books were written for children, though adults will enjoy this as well. But so this shares the history and helps readers to understand that time better and some of the complicated issues. It has 75 activities. It has discussion questions even, whether it's just to help the reader think a little bit more about the book or for a family or a class to discuss the books. So there's a lot in there. I actually start each chapter with a little bit of a discussion about what happens in the book, generally speaking. And then most of the chapters have some sort of something some sort of like something that makes that book special. And so this is chapter 4 on the banks of Plum Creek, which takes place in Walnut Grove, Minnesota. And I talk all about sod. I have quite a bit of information here about sod houses. And then the chapter by chapter dig deeper section begins, where it's really almost every chapter has a couple of notes to help readers to think a little bit more and understand the little house books better. So.
I wish I had that when I was homeschooling my kids, because they both had to read Farmer Boy. And
I keep hearing that, whether it's I wish I had this when I read it as a child, or when I was teaching it, or when I was homeschooling. And I guess what I say now is better late than never. But then there are a lot of teachers and even parents have created their own little things to go with whatever book they're reading or studying. But hopefully I'll make through this book, it'll be a little bit easier for families to do that as well as teachers. And the nice thing is this is really written for the child, so a child can really explore and live like Laura and understand things better too. So yeah.
Right. So how did you get the idea for this book?
Oh, I was actually reading. I have 3 children, and right now the oldest is 13. And in 2014, my children and I were reading the Chronicles of Narnia, and along with that, we were reading this hefty companion guide, which is actually falling apart at this point. But it's called Roar, and it's by Heather Kopp and David Kopp, and it's a guide to Narnia. And my kids loved it, and they were on the younger side, but they loved the quizzes inside. They loved understanding Narnia better, and we had to make Turkish delight, and there was all sorts of exploring the Narnia books further through the book Roar. And I was like, I could write a book like this. What would it be on? And it didn't take me long to figure out what it would be. And at that point, I had only been writing for adults at that point. So it was very quickly, I say quickly, it wasn't quick, but I wanted to understand the publishing world better, because I'd only written for magazines at that point. And I wanted to understand how writing for children was different from adults, so I started attending conferences and such as well. So yeah, it's been fun. Now, can you tell us a little bit about your research in South Korea for The Ocean Calls, Tina?
So, like all good nonfiction writers, I started on the internet, and I like to buy pretty notebooks with each new story I start. So I just took a lot of notes, and my mentor, Nancy Sanders, is on here. So she had taught me that when you see 2 facts that say the same thing, then you know that is a reliable fact. So I was writing down facts from all different articles I had read, and then I wrote up a first draft. It was pure nonfiction, and I thought, oh, Highlights magazine would love this. So I sent it to them, and I was right, they were interested in the Haenyeo, but they wanted quotes and more sensory thing. And so I looked up how to get to Jeju, and I discovered that it was very cheap to fly there. So because I was a teacher, I took my family there on spring break in 2018 and in 2019. And we went to all these spots on the beach trying to find them. And we would talk to the locals when they were coming out. And so we found different areas on Jeju. I took lots of pictures, and we tried to talk to them. My husband did. Their dialect is a little different, so it's hard for him to understand. And then some are willing to talk and some are not, because they are ashamed of their profession, because they look down on themselves. They didn't get an education to go to college and stuff. So we would talk to them. And then we also discovered there are more Haenyeo in Busan, which is a large city in southern Korea. So I got to talk to a bunch of them down there too. But anyway, after being able to be at the ocean, smell it, to hear their whistles, to see them, I came back and wrote it again and added it and sent it out to my critique groups. And they were able to give me lots of feedback. And finally it sold. So, yeah.
You sold it as a book instead of an article.
Right. Yeah.
What made you kind of turn?
So I guess, I don't know, I wanted to show a granddaughter wanting to be like her grandmother. I wanted to show that connection and the tradition passing down. So that's why I fictionalized it.
Well, it works. It's a beautiful story.
Thank you. Let's see. Okay, let me get a question for you.
Sure.
How did you land your contract, or did you land the contract and write up a proposal first before writing the book?
Basically, I wrote a sample manuscript, so it wasn't the full. I believe there are 10 chapters in the Laura Ingalls Wildlife Companion, and I did a sample chapter, and that was all that was required for Chicago Review Press. And I studied online. I read books about how to write a proposal, because it's a lot of work and a lot of thinking that has to go into the book before it's even written. But for those who are unfamiliar, if you write nonfiction, that's any length basically beyond a picture book, you have to, it's usually suggested to write a proposal first, because sometimes the publisher will say, oh, this could work, but not as it is. And that's actually the first reply that I got from Chicago Review Press. It was, we like this idea, but it won't work like this. And so thankfully, I had been around writers enough to know that that was not a full-out rejection. And so I responded with, asking their thoughts and what would need to be changed. Earlier I mentioned the quizzes in the Roar book that my kids enjoyed so much, and the editorial staff kind of thought that might be too teachery, too school-ish, and so we decided to add those quizzes for each of the little house books to my newsletter subscribers. So my newsletter subscribers get a different, I call it trivia. It can be used as a quiz, but that goes out to my subscribers each month, a different book's trivia. So yes, I wrote up a sample. I wrote up the proposal, and I had some people take a look at it. But I had an offer in 2016 from Chicago Review Press, but we didn't actually go to contract until 2018. There were some, because it's the little house books, there were rights and permissions that we needed to obtain and make sure that we did it right, even though we weren't quoting material within my book. We still needed to make sure that we had the right permissions. So it took two extra years, but during that time, I learned a lot more about writing for children. I think it's actually a better book because I waited. Lots of sidebars and things like that might not have been, that they weren't in my first vision for the book. So I think it's a better book because of the wait.
Right.
Yeah.
Waiting is hard, but but it helps us have better books.
It does. You included, now you said that during your research it was a little bit hard to quote, or I'm sorry, to interview some people because they were a little ashamed of what they do. But you had some really beautiful quotes in your Backmatter. And the Backmatter is that information at the back of the picture book that just tells more. But the additional information there was just really helped the reader to understand everything a lot better. I really appreciate that. So when you switched your what was going to be the magazine article and you changed it to fiction, and then it became, it was a vision for, you had a vision for a picture book. Was that when you kind of thought of Dayeon and Grandma as the characters? Was that kind of right away, or was that kind of
yeah, but I had a different name for the girl. I had her name as Youngie and Grandma. And then maybe, I don't know, 5 drafts later, one of my students, I found out her Korean name was Dayeon, and I thought it was so pretty. So I changed my character's name to hers. But I asked her dad first if I could use her name in the book. So I'm going to actually mail this to her in Korea. So yeah, so Dayeon and Grandma. Yeah.
And what I'm also curious, what made you use the term grandma instead of the Korean term?
Word, because I just felt like American readers or readers who did not understand Korean would relate more to the word grandma.
Yeah, but otherwise, we might have wondered, was this mom? Was we might have wondered. Yeah. So it's very clear. I did appreciate that.
Yeah. But in one of my novel that's coming out does have the Korean word for grandma. So,
is that in the graphic novel?
Yes. Yes. All right. So you kind of told us a little bit, but what was your research? Did I already ask you that? What was your research like? I know that for Chicago Review Press, you have to find photos and obtain those rights,
and that was new for me. So my research, so some of my research, because my book was about the Little House books, I created, I created charts for each chapter had, each book had its own chart, and each chapter had a whole row devoted to it. And I was looking for things like plots and events, the people, the words, because I have several hundred terms, pioneer terms defined in the book as well. Food and activities, because I knew I was looking for ideas, as well as places, and then some other things that I might just want to take note of. So I did that kind of research. I didn't get hands-on at all the different wilder sites, but I did go to the Almanza Wilder Farm in upstate New York, because that was one that I could drive to. It was only 8 hours away, so that was kind of a simple one to visit. But my editor and I agreed that I didn't actually have to visit all of the sites, because my book would be more about the books instead of the sites. But yes, so let's see. So there you can see 2 images, and probably on the screen they look very similar, because they are pretty similar, but they are different as well. And one image was a grasshopper, and one was a locust, the Rocky Mountain locust, because the grasshoppers that are discussed in Plum Creek, though they're called grasshoppers in the novel, they're actually these Rocky Mountain locusts, and they were tormented. But yes, I had to get all the images. I had to secure the rights for any of the images within the book. And so I feel, some of those were easy to obtain, and others were much more difficult. But I paid for some, and others I was able to use, like the Library of Congress and things like that, to utilize some free images. But even so, and every image I had to fill out a form showing that that we had permission to use it. And And even the, so even on the cover, image of Laura Ingalls Wilder. This is from the Almanza Wilder farm. That's the pantry. This is actually not my child. Oh, here, let me get a little closer. So it's a girl at a wash tub. And that picture was taken in 2014 when my oldest daughter had a little house birthday party. And I did not know it was going to be part of a book at that point. Maybe it was, yeah, I think it was, maybe it was, no, it was 2012, excuse me. So it was before I had the idea for this. So I did not know I was going to be writing a book or researching or anything like that. And so I had to get permission from my friend to include her in there. But even some, I'm trying to find an illustration. There are illustrations in here for the activities. And a couple of them have children in them. And most of those children are my children, but not all of them. And so even for those, I had to fill out a form for each image that had a person in it that we had permission from the parents to include it. But the research for images, I did leave a lot of time for myself before the deadline to do that. And I'm glad I did, because it was very time consuming, and a lot of just detail work, making sure that I had all the, do we have permission to use this image on the cover? Do we have, and having to make sure that we had the right permission to use each image too. So it was interesting, and it wasn't, it probably would have been a lot easier if I was more of an expert at image research. There are those who are, and I'm not that person, but I learned a lot. I sure did. So, yeah. So, how, now you told us how you went to South Korea. Did you get photos for, no, you pretty much told us about your research, I think. For the title, I love the title, The Ocean Calls. And I when I was reading, I saw it within the manuscript. Did that pop out at you right away for the title? And I'm also kind of curious if the ocean calls you, because I hear that for some people. So tell us about even just choosing the title.
So the title evolved because first, when I did it as a fiction, it was my grandma, Haenyeo. Then that changed to Dayeon Dives with Grandma, so that I could have my main character's name in there. Well, then my agent decided that we needed a jazzier title. So actually The Ocean Calls came from my husband. So I had him read the manuscript and he came up with that. And that's its name. Does the ocean call me? It calls me to come out for relaxation. I like to walk on the beach and pick up seashells. But now that I'm in Iowa, there is no ocean. So I like, we found a pond here and there. I like to walk around the ponds, but some of them are private, and so you can't walk around. So I do miss the ocean in Korea.
Yeah.
All right, so what is your favorite activity in the book?
Well, I have a lot of, I had food recipes to do, activities and games, as well as crafts. And I think I'll show this. I think it was Silver Lake. Mary made a rag rug, and this is a trivet, so I just use it as like a hot pad under pots and pans, and I made this out of t-shirt material. This was probably one of my favorite things to make, and it was also much more complicated than I anticipated. The braiding the three fabrics together, that was really enjoyable, really relaxing. But it was really, really long too. I don't know if it was like 20 feet long. So it was really long in order to make this. So, but that was really enjoyable. And then probably my favorite food were either the soda crackers, which were delicious, or the self-turning donuts. Just lots of fun. And my family tolerated, sometimes fully supported, sometimes asked for more, like the soda crackers. They were very much appreciated. The dried apples we've made multiple times. But there are some things. It's like when we had a chicken pot pie with biscuits on top. Before I even said it was, I was testing it for the book, they knew. It just kind of amuses me a little bit how some of my testing affected the family. Probably my favorite activity to do would be, probably my favorite activity was Cat's Cradle, just because it makes me think of my childhood and doing Cat's Cradle with my sister. And now I've taught it to my girls, and yeah, it's just fun stuff. So I had another question, but I think you've already shared it with us. So I'm wondering, would you want to share your favorite page spread, whether it's the images or maybe read us your beginning lines. Beginning lines in a book are so important. Okay. So maybe read us a little bit too.
I'll share my favorite spread is this one. I think it's beautiful.
Can you hold it up just a little bit further so they can see the mermaid tails in the shadows?
See it?
Yes, it's gorgeous.
In Jeju, there are lots of canola wildflowers everywhere. And so I think Jess caught that beautifully here in this spread. And then I'll read the first page. Dayeon and Grandma stretched and watched the sun's first rays kiss the sea. "The ocean is calling me today," said Grandma. "I must dive." "I want to be a Haenyeo like you," said Dayeon. "You're like a treasure-hunting mermaid." And that's the first.
I love that. Thank you, Tina.
You're welcome. And then my last question for you is, I know that with the Laura Ingalls books, there is some controversy with the Native Americans and the racism and stuff that they now are presenting. And I know, like, one of the literature awards, they changed the name for that. So I did appreciate how you handled that in your book. So if you wanted to address that, because I know probably readers will be wondering.
And so I think one of the reasons why a book like this is needed is because not every teacher, not every parent can have those discussions with kids to help them understand what's those complicated things. Laura Ingalls Wilder she really did talk about the race issues, and she didn't sugarcoat it. She had her ma, who really showed some racism, some prejudice against the Native Americans. And in the Laura Ingalls Wilder Companion, I do call them American Indians to be consistent with Laura Ingalls Wilder calling them Indians in her books. I didn't want the children to have to go back and forth, especially if it was a younger reader who hadn't really learned about that yet. But I think we have to talk about it. And not every child has the opportunity to have those discussions. So I do, I did mark a little bit in here. So this is in the introduction to Little House on the Prairie, which was the third book in the series. In the introduction, before I did the chapter by chapter notes, I had said, "We change and grow as a country and people. When we do, we realize the ways people lived and thought in the past weren't always right. We can learn from the past and make changes in ourselves." As you read Little House on the Prairie, try to consider both sides of the story, the Ingalls family side and that of the Osage American Indians. And that was just in that introduction. And then I also address some specific issues as well. And then in one of the later books, there's some additional things come back, and I address that as well. We have to talk about it. We have to acknowledge it. But one thing that I like about the Little House books, they share one family's perspective. Mm. And, as I said, Laura Ingalls Wilder, she didn't sugarcoat, and she could have made it so that there was much less tension. And I don't think the family was perfect. And I share some things within within my book that weren't blatantly said within the Little House books about the family and Charles Ingalls and their rights to be in Indian territory. You know, a child might not quite understand why it's called Indian territory and things like that. But we need to understand history. We need to talk about it. We need to learn and do better, really. So that's my thought. So I hope that for those parents who aren't always able to know what to say, or teachers who don't know what to say, the book can kind of be that mentor and that conversation with a young person to help them think deeper about the race issues within the book. So I'm glad you asked that question, and I appreciate your perspective on it too. So yeah. So shall we open it up to questions we have a few visitors here. If you would like to ask any questions, please do so right in the chat. And you know, we have a few more minutes. So any questions from you all?
Thank you to Anita. She said, love those colors and words, Tina, and love anything to do with Laura Ingalls Wilder.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, that's a good question. Tina, what is the age range of your new book?
I'd say, I think I've seen like 4 to 8 picture book, but I would say like kindergarten to 3rd grade. I read it to my kindergartners in Korea, and they really were fascinated by it. So,
and really, I think it's such a new, and especially for us here in the United States, the Ocean Calls will introduce any age to the Haenyeo. So I think it can go beyond, even though that's the target age. Oh, thank you, Nancy. She says congratulations to both of you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Oh, thank you, Nancy. She says, Annette, what a great resource for readers, teachers, and homeschooling families. I hope so. And I hope more and more learn about it too, because, you know, there is controversy related to the Little House books. But that doesn't mean we don't read it. We just need to think carefully about them and help our young people to do the same.
Right.
It's introducing something new to many of those readers. They might not know about the history in the 1800s, and some adults might not either. So yes, and Tina, your book is such a fresh, new story. It certainly is. It is.
Thanks, Nancy. Are any of you working on writing something? I know.
Here's a question from Anita.
Okay.
It's for both of us. What was your biggest obstacle to publishing this book, and also your first book, and what did you learn from the experience? So Tina, do you want to answer that first? What was your biggest obstacle to publishing this book and your first book?
I don't think this book had any big problems. I mean, the things I had to work the most on with my editor was the Backmatter. I'll show you.
And that Backmatter there's a lot
hefty.
there.
I wanted them to include some photos of the Haenyeo, but there's no room. So you can go to my website and see some photos, and you can also just Google the Haenyeo. Yeah, so my editor and I went back and forth on the Backmatter, and she organized it by quotes. So instead of outlining it, each quote has a topic, and we stuck the facts that went together with each quote.
That was a really good structure.
And then it says,
what did you learn from the experience?
I guess I learned a lot about editing and doing the copy editing with the Backmatter with my editor, Joanna. She was awesome. And now I get more emails from her about ongoing things like, it got 4 stars, and it's a Junior Library Guild selection, and I just got an email that someone wants to perhaps make the audio for it.
Tina, this is
Mhm.
big. Congratulations. I didn't know all of that. And the 4 stars, that's a really big deal for those of you who don't know that. So I had mentioned my biggest obstacle for the Laura Ingalls Wilder Companion was obtaining those rights and permissions from the Little House Heritage Trust as well as HarperCollins. You know, and working with 2 entities instead of just one did make that a little bit more complicated. But really it was, you know, and what I learned was that the wait can be worth it because I think it is a better book because of it. So, and my first book, my first 5 books actually, were all for the educational market. And so with those books, I worked with an editor and a publisher came up with ideas to match curriculum in-house. And then the editor contacted authors to say, would you like to, you know, when they contacted me for the first time, would you like to write a book about insects for 4th through 6th graders? And I said yes. So that first book was actually easier to get published than this one, or my next month my Who Knew the Truth About Owls will be out. So that, you know, that first book was a lot easier because of that relationship I had with an editor at a publishing house, and I had met her at a writing conference. So, oh, thank you, Laura Ingalls Gunn. She said, very excited about both of these books. Thank you for sharing your gifts. And Nancy I. Sanders, who is also an author, she said, will you both have online resources for your books? Yay, Tina. Talking about all of those exciting things happening. So Tina, do you have online resources? As you already mentioned seeing some of the photographs.
Yes, I have my own website, and then I have one page for the Ocean Calls. So I put some stuff up there. And I also made a teacher's guide. So that's on my website. So my website is www.tinamcho.com. So yeah, you can check those out. And then I was also going to reply to Anita. She had asked about my first book was Rice from Heaven. And with that book, I learned how to write lyrically, because that one, I had to revise it before it sold. And so I learned how to, I Googled a lot about how to write a lyrical picture book. And so, yeah, that had a little more problems.
So my website is AnnetteWhipple.com, and that website, it's a lot of things related for writers and teachers to help them get started writing. And then I have a site devoted just to the Laura Ingalls Wilder Companion, which is called wildercompanion.com. And that has more than just what's in the book. It also has some things that are within the book as well. And then with my newsletter subscribers, they can have the additional trivia, or and I think blog subscribers get some different Little House materials as well for the blog subscribers to wildercompanion.com. So yes, having resources for fans is or writers or teachers is just really important. So thanks for asking that, Nancy. We appreciate that. Any other questions? Ooh. Now, Tina, do you have a newsletter as well?
I don't have a newsletter. I haven't had time to do that. I do have a blog that is lacking with my time, because I'm also a teacher, so I will update my blog. But
yes.
But you have a newsletter. How do you?
I do. So if you go to either wildercompanion.com or AnnetteWhipple.com, both of those have subscribe buttons there, and you can put in your email address and make sure you confirm it, and then you'll be subscribed and you'll have the chance to get some extra resources. Thanks for asking that, Nancy.
But I'm on social media, so if there's any new things, I'm always putting it out there.
You are. You're good about that. I try. Okay. This has been really nice. If there's any last minute questions, please feel free to pop them right in the chat there. But this has been really nice, just having a little book chat for the Ocean Calls and the Laura Ingalls Wilder Companion. We will, if you want to watch this again later, we do plan to share the video link. So
Annette, what are you working on next? for now.
So right now, I'm working on the Who Knew the Truth About Owls. Raycraft Books wants that to be a series. So
Oh, neat.
I've working on a book about dogs, and I am actually doing revisions with my editor for that. And then also researching about, you'll either love it or hate it, spiders. So just those two will come out next year because they're photo illustrated, so things can move a little bit faster than if they were just illustrated by an artist.
So is Raycraft an educational publisher?
No, Raycraft is an imprint with Benchmark, which Benchmark is an
Yes, I know
educational
Benchmark.
publisher,
Okay.
and Raycraft is their trade imprint within them. So what are you working on, Tina?
So I'm working on 2 picture books still about Korea. So one of them, I wanted it to be a pure nonfiction, but all of my nonfictions kind of segue into fiction. I don't know why, but so it was going to be about the rice field that was across the street from my school. There's lots of interesting creatures that I've seen come out of that rice field. So I thought this would make a good story about the ecosystem. So that has become fictional. So my critique groups are chopping away at that one. I hope my agent likes it. And then I'm working on a story about Korea, about their fireflies. And that also it's fictional with the Backmatter.
Wow. And on top of that, you're teaching as well. You're busy.
Yes.
You are busy. Oh, okay. Any last words, Tina, before we say goodbye?
No, just probably many of you who are in the audience are writers, so I just wish you the best in your stories and keep at it. And I feel like with each book, I'm growing and learning new things.
I agree. And whether we're readers or teachers or writers, we're always changing, we're always growing, no matter what it is. So you're right, Tina. Okay. Anything else that anybody wants to say in the chat before we say goodbye? Okay. Well, I think it's time for us to sign off then.
Okay, I'm going to hit stop recording.